Hello, and welcome to the Unseen Question. Religion once seemed like a permanent fixture in human life. It shaped governments, dictated moral codes, and gave meaning to billions of people across centuries. But when you look closely at our world today, you can't help but wonder, are we actually witnessing the slow unraveling of religion? The question isn't about whether people will stop asking big questions about life, death, and purpose. That will never go away. The real question is whether institutional religion, with its rituals, dogmas, and hierarchies, can survive in a world where information, science, and individual freedom keep expanding. When we examine the numbers, the trends are striking. In many Western countries, church attendance has collapsed over just a few decades. The fastest growing religious identity isn't a religion at all. It's people who say they belong to none, the so-called nuns. And what's fascinating is that this isn't just a passing fad. In places like Scandinavia, entire generations have grown up without religion being a central part of their lives. The shift is visible not just in surveys, but in everyday culture. Holidays that used to be sacred are now mostly commercial events. Sundays, once guarded for church, are now for sports, shopping, or leisure. Even religious symbols that once held unquestioned authority now get challenged, mocked, or reinterpreted. Why is this happening? One reason is that religion thrived in times when knowledge was limited. When we didn't understand disease, weather, or natural disasters, it made sense to think of gods controlling the world. But now we can predict hurricanes, treat infections, and land rovers on Mars. The gap for supernatural explanations keeps shrinking. And it's not just science replacing superstition, it's also about trust. Scandal after scandal has eroded the credibility of religious institutions, from child abuse cover-ups in the Catholic Church to televangelists asking for private jets, to political entanglements, where religion gets used as a weapon. People are asking themselves, if these leaders claim to speak for God, why do their actions look so human, so corrupt, so self-serving? At the same time, religion has struggled to adapt to modern values. On issues like gender equality, LGBTQ rights, and reproductive freedom, religious teachings often seem frozen in another century. Younger generations don't want to live under rules that deny basic freedoms or human dignity. And when religion refuses to evolve, people quietly walk away. But it's not only rejection of religion, it's also replacement. Many people now find meaning in communities built around shared interests, activism, or philosophy. Yoga studios, meditation apps, online forums, or even fandoms often serve the role of giving belonging and ritual that churches once provided. You don't need stained glass windows when you've got social networks and real-world connections that are just as powerful. Still, we shouldn't assume religion is simply disappearing everywhere. In some parts of the world, it's still very strong. Countries in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia show steady or even growing levels of belief. Sometimes this happens because religion is tied tightly to national identity or political power. Other times it's because poverty, inequality, and instability make people cling more strongly to faith. So the end of religion is uneven. It's rapid in some places and stagnant or reversed in others. The bigger question is whether religion as a whole can reinvent itself, or whether it's heading toward the same fate as ancient belief systems like Greek mythology or Norse gods. After all, once upon a time, entire civilizations prayed to Zeus or Odin with absolute conviction. They built temples, sacrificed animals, and organized their societies around these gods. Today, those same gods are nothing more than characters in movies or video games. What's to stop Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, or Buddhism from one day being viewed the same way? History shows us that belief systems collapse not because people suddenly stop caring about meaning, but because those systems no longer meet their needs. When they can't answer questions convincingly, when they fail to inspire confidence, when they lag behind cultural and scientific progress, they lose their grip. Some argue that religion will never disappear because humans have a deep psychological need for certainty and comfort. We fear death, we want purpose, and we crave belonging. But that doesn't guarantee religion itself will last. It only means those needs will find other outlets. Philosophy, art, science, humanist ethics, and even technology can provide the structure that religion once monopolized. Consider how quickly technology is shaping new ways of thinking: artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, space exploration. These developments don't just give us practical tools, they also reshape how we view ourselves. If we can edit our own DNA or send humans to Mars, the old religious narratives about creation and destiny start to feel small, outdated, irrelevant. And then there's the internet. For most of history, religion controlled the flow of information. Priests, imams, monks, they were the gatekeepers. But now, anyone with a phone can fact-check sacred texts, watch debates, or discover alternative philosophies in seconds. Censorship that once kept people inside faith bubbles doesn't work anymore. The walls have crumbled, yet religion is adaptive. It tries to rebrand itself. You'll see churches that look more like coffee shops, sermons streamed on TikTok, mega conferences with laser lights and rock bands. Some religions even embrace mindfulness or environmentalism to stay relevant. But beneath the new packaging, the old doctrines often remain the same, and people eventually notice the disconnect. So are we watching the end of religion? Maybe not the final end, but certainly the unraveling of its dominance. We're witnessing a shift where belief is no longer assumed, where questioning is normal, and where opting out doesn't carry the stigma it once did. The decline of religion doesn't mean the decline of morality, meaning, or wonder. It means those things are being reclaimed by humanity itself. Instead of waiting for answers handed down from pulpits, people are building their own frameworks for truth and purpose. Frameworks based on evidence, compassion, and shared human experience. If the trend continues, the religions of today may one day be studied the way we now study the myths of the past, not as eternal truths, but as fascinating cultural artifacts, stories that once shaped empires, guided lives, and built monuments, before fading into memory. And maybe, just maybe, that's not the end of meaning, but the beginning of something more honest, more human, and more free. Religion doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, it fractures, it transforms. Think about Christianity in Europe. 1,000 years ago, the church wasn't just about prayer and rituals. It was the backbone of society. It controlled kings, dictated laws, and owned vast amounts of land. Today, in many European countries, churches stand empty, maintained more as museums than centers of faith. You can walk into a massive cathedral, beautifully built centuries ago, and find only a handful of worshippers scattered across pews that once held hundreds. The echo of the past is louder than the present reality. In places like the United States, religion has historically been far stronger. It shaped politics, culture, and education. Yet even there, cracks are spreading. Younger generations are less likely to identify as religious, less likely to attend church, and less likely to see religion as central to their identity. What once felt like the unquestioned core of American life now feels like a cultural fault line, and the more people openly step away, the more others feel free to do the same. It's almost like a social domino effect. When people see their neighbors, co-workers, or even family members leaving religion and still living meaningful, moral, fulfilling lives, the fear of leaving disappears. For centuries, religion's greatest tool wasn't just belief. It was fear of what would happen without belief. Eternal punishment, social exile, loss of identity. But as more people break that spell and demonstrate there is life, and often a better one, outside of religion, the cycle weakens. There's also a global shift in how we think about morality. For so long, religion claimed to be the source of right and wrong. Yet now, moral progress often comes in direct conflict with religious dogma, whether it's abolishing slavery, securing women's rights, or pushing for equality regardless of gender or sexuality. Progress didn't come because of religion, but often in spite of it. And that track record makes people question whether religious morality is actually moral at all. At the same time, science doesn't just replace religious explanations, it inspires awe in its own right. The universe revealed through telescopes and microscopes is far more vast and intricate than anything written in scripture. The story of evolution, the complexity of DNA, the billions of galaxies, these aren't dry facts. They are profound realities that spark wonder. And unlike religious claims, they stand up to testing, evidence, and revision. That difference is crucial. Religion asks for blind faith. Science thrives on doubt and discovery. Which worldview feels more sustainable in the long run? But we should also ask, what happens to societies as religion loses its grip? Does life become more chaotic, more shallow, more fragmented? Or does it open the door to more authentic ways of living? The evidence so far suggests the latter. Countries with the highest levels of secularism often rank the highest in happiness, equality, and social trust. Places like Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands don't collapse without religion. They flourish. That doesn't mean secular societies are perfect. Far from it. But it does show that religion isn't the glue holding civilization together. Human cooperation, empathy, and reason are enough, maybe even better. Of course, some argue that religion will evolve to survive, and maybe it will, but survival often means compromise. When churches start to accept things they once condemned, when doctrines shift to fit modern values, it raises the question, if divine truth can be updated like a smartphone app, was it really divine to begin with? If eternal laws bend with the times, maybe they weren't eternal at all. It's also worth noticing how religion, in many places, is becoming more political than spiritual. Leaders use it less as a path to personal enlightenment and more as a tool for power. But that may be a double-edged sword. The more religion aligns itself with political agendas, the more it risks being discarded when those agendas fail or change. Tying itself to nationalism, authoritarianism, or culture wars may give it short-term relevance, but in the long term, it may speed up its decline. And here's the irony. The more religion fights to hold on, the more it reveals its weakness. When you need laws, propaganda, or threats to keep people in the pews, it's clear the faith itself is no longer enough. Real belief doesn't need to be enforced. It should speak for itself. The fact that many institutions resort to pressure shows just how fragile their influence has become. So maybe the real end of religion won't be loud. It won't be fiery confrontations or sudden mass conversions. It will be quiet, gradual, unnoticed by many until it's already happened. The way old traditions slip into memory without anyone declaring their death. A time will come when religion is less a living force and more a cultural relic. That doesn't mean the big questions go away. If anything, it puts more responsibility on us. Without religious authorities handing out ready-made answers, we have to wrestle with the mysteries ourselves. That can feel daunting, but it's also liberating. It means the search for meaning is no longer confined to ancient texts, but open to human creativity, reason, and collaboration. The end of religion, if that's what we're witnessing, isn't the end of meaning. It's the beginning of something that belongs fully to us. A meaning we shape, refine, and redefine. A meaning that doesn't divide us into tribes of believers and non-believers, but unites us as humans facing the same mysteries, building the same future. One of the most overlooked reasons people cling to religion is psychological comfort. The promise that death is not the end, that suffering has meaning, that justice will eventually prevail. These are powerful emotional lifelines. Religion offers a narrative where nothing is random, where even tragedy fits into a larger plan. That kind of reassurance is hard to replace. But here's the thing, just because something feels comforting doesn't make it true. Throughout history, humans have believed countless things for comfort that turned out to be false, from superstitions about spirits in the forest to rituals to guarantee good harvests. We crave patterns, order, and certainty. Our brains are wired to find meaning, even if that meaning is invented. Religion fits perfectly into that psychological groove. The question is, do we still need it in the same way? For many people, science, philosophy, and secular communities now provide enough comfort and meaning without requiring belief in the supernatural. Therapy can replace confessionals. Meditation can replace prayer. Human solidarity can replace divine justice. Slowly but surely, we're finding new ways to meet those same emotional needs. Historically, we can see how entire religions once seen as eternal vanished when their psychological grip weakened. Think about ancient Egypt. For over 2,000 years, people built enormous temples and pyramids to honor gods like Ra and Osiris. Their religion wasn't a side note, it was the foundation of society. And yet today, those gods are museum pieces, studied by archaeologists rather than worshipped by the masses. What once felt eternal is now extinct. The same happened to the Aztecs and Mayans. Entire systems of gods, rituals, and sacred calendars disappeared within a few generations. Their followers were as devoted as any modern believer, yet their religions fell into silence. If history shows us anything, it's that no belief system is immune to decline. So, when people say religion will never disappear because it's human nature, history pushes back. Religion has always been in flux, shifting, dissolving, and reinventing itself. What's different now is the speed. Global communication, scientific progress, and cultural exchange accelerate the process. What once took centuries now happens within decades. Looking at the modern world, we can already glimpse what a post-religious society might look like. In some highly secular countries, religion barely registers in daily life. Weddings and funerals are celebrated without priests. Schools teach ethics without scripture. Political debates rarely invoke divine authority. Instead, values are debated openly, on human terms, with evidence and reason. That doesn't mean such societies are empty. In fact, people still create rituals, traditions, and celebrations. They just aren't tied to divine authority. Secular holidays, national traditions, or even cultural fandoms fill the space once occupied by religion. Humans will always create meaning, but meaning doesn't require gods. Of course, there's a darker side. When old belief systems collapse, they can leave a vacuum. Some people may turn to conspiracy theories, cults, or extreme ideologies as substitutes. You can already see this in parts of the world where religion declines, but radical political or pseudoscientific movements rise. The human hunger for certainty can be redirected in dangerous ways, which means the challenge isn't just rejecting religion, but replacing it with something healthier, more constructive, and more grounded in reality. This brings us to a crucial point. The end of religion isn't guaranteed. It depends on how societies handle the transition. If secular institutions fail to provide meaning, connection, and purpose, religion may adapt and resurge. But if we continue building systems that meet those needs without dogma, systems based on empathy, science, and human connection, then religion may continue to fade. Think about education. In places where schools teach critical thinking, open inquiry, and scientific literacy, religion struggles to maintain authority. In places where education is censored or controlled, religion thrives. The future of religion may depend less on belief itself and more on how freely knowledge circulates. Technology also plays a double role. On one hand, the internet exposes people to information that challenges religious narratives. On the other hand, algorithms can create echo chambers where fundamentalism thrives. A person can be surrounded by endless evidence against their beliefs, but if they're trapped in a digital bubble, they might never see it. So technology alone won't end religion. It depends on how we use it. Another fascinating angle is how religion interacts with wealth and stability. Sociologists have found that in countries with high levels of security, strong healthcare, reliable institutions, low inequality, religion tends to decline. But in places with poverty, instability, or corruption, religion often grows stronger. People turn to gods when they feel powerless. If the world as a whole becomes more stable and secure, religion may decline naturally. But if crises multiply, religion may cling on. And yet, even in crises, something has changed. When a natural disaster strikes, more people now look to scientists, doctors, and engineers for solutions than to priests or prophets. That subtle shift shows where real authority is migrating. When survival is on the line, faith in prayer often gives way to faith in human expertise. So, are we watching the end of religion? The answer might be that we're watching the end of religion as we know it, the decline of its dominance, its monopoly over morality, its unquestioned authority. What comes next isn't necessarily a godless void. It's a world where meaning, morality, and belonging are redefined on human terms. And in that world, the stories of gods may survive, not as commands to obey, but as myths to study, reminders of how humans once made sense of the world before learning to see it as it really is. If we look ahead 50 or 100 years, what might the role of religion actually look like? One scenario is that religion becomes mostly symbolic. People may still call themselves Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist, but without strict belief, similar to how many people today celebrate cultural traditions without literally believing in them. Easter eggs and Christmas trees aren't about theology anymore. They're just rituals people enjoy. Religion could become more like folklore, a set of customs passed down for identity, not divine truth. Another scenario is that religion retreats into smaller, more intense groups. As mainstream belief fades, what remains could be concentrated in fundamentalist pockets. These groups might cling even harder to their traditions, becoming louder and more extreme as they feel under threat. We already see this happening in some places, where fundamentalist movements push back against modern culture. They may not represent the majority, but they often wield outsized influence because of their intensity. There's also the possibility of hybrid systems. Already we see religions borrowing from psychology, self-help, and even pop culture to stay relevant. Churches that sound more like motivational seminars, temples offering yoga and mindfulness, pastors preaching with TED Talk slideshows. These hybrids may survive for a while, but the question remains, how long can they keep the supernatural core hidden under modern packaging? And then there's the boldest scenario, a world where religion is studied the way we now study mythology, where Zeus and Thor sit on the same shelf as Yahweh, Allah, and Krishna, not as living gods, but as historical artifacts. Future schoolchildren might learn about these deities the same way they now learn about ancient Rome, with fascination but no obligation to believe. Whether that happens depends on whether humanity builds strong alternatives. Because if people don't find meaning, purpose, and community elsewhere, religion will always have an opening. That's why the decline of religion can't just be about tearing down, it has to be about building up. Education that encourages critical thinking, communities that provide connection without dogma, philosophies that offer purpose without superstition. We can already see hints of this construction. Humanist organizations, secular charities, ethical societies, even online communities where people support each other through life's challenges without invoking divine authority. These are the seedlings of a world beyond religion. It's also worth considering how global challenges might accelerate the shift. Climate change, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, space exploration. These are problems and frontiers that religious answers don't really address. No amount of scripture explains how to regulate genetic engineering or what ethical guidelines should shape artificial intelligence? These are questions humanity must face together, not divided by faith. And the more humanity confronts these challenges with science, collaboration, and reason, the more religion feels irrelevant. Outdated texts can't keep up with problems that didn't even exist when they were written. The contrast becomes clearer with every passing decade. Of course, religions will try to adapt. Some will claim their texts already foresaw modern science. Others will reinterpret metaphors to match new discoveries. But adaptation has limits. A religion that changes too much stops being recognizable, and one that doesn't change becomes obsolete. It's a paradox with no easy escape. If we zoom out even further, hundreds of years into the future, religion might look like a stepping stone in human evolution, a phase where we needed stories to guide us before we learned to guide ourselves. Just as children need myths before they're ready for the truth, humanity may have needed religion before it could embrace evidence and reason fully. The end of religion, then, isn't a tragedy. It's a sign of growth. But here's something to think about. What happens if humanity encounters life beyond Earth? If we discover intelligent civilizations on other planets, will our old religions even make sense anymore? How would sacred stories confined to one small planet hold up in a universe teeming with other perspectives? The possibility alone makes traditional doctrines feel provincial, limited, fragile. Religion thrives on certainty, on telling people they already have the ultimate answers. But the future is a place of constant questioning, experimentation, and discovery. Which worldview is better suited for that? The rigid one or the flexible one? And that brings us back to the central question. Are we watching the end of religion? Not in a dramatic, final sense, but in a gradual, undeniable decline of its authority, like an empire that doesn't fall in one day, but slowly erodes until people realize the power it once held has already slipped away. The end of religion doesn't mean the end of wonder, or purpose, or morality. It means those things are being reclaimed by humanity itself, taken out of the hands of priests and prophets, and placed into the shared hands of us all. So maybe we're not watching the death of religion, but the birth of something else. A new way of being human, one not bound by ancient rules or divine fear, but free to seek truth, meaning, and connection on our own terms. When we talk about the possible end of religion, it's important to remember just how deeply it has shaped human behavior. For much of history, religion was not a choice, it was a given. People were born into it, punished for questioning it, and often killed for leaving it. To step outside of the religious framework was unthinkable. But today, that's no longer the case in much of the world. That shift alone signals a monumental change. Think about how revolutionary it is that people can openly say, "I don't believe," without being silenced. In some places, that freedom still doesn't exist, but where it does, it breaks the oldest chain that religion had on humanity, the chain of fear. Once people realize they can live without belief, the grip loosens and it rarely tightens again. Psychologists call this process deconversion, and it often follows a predictable pattern. First comes doubt, a quiet question that doesn't have a satisfying answer. Then comes disillusionment, when people notice contradictions, hypocrisy, or harm done in the name of faith. Finally comes departure, often with a mix of relief and grief. This process is happening on a massive scale today, amplified by the availability of information and the visibility of others who've walked the same path. There's another layer worth exploring: the generational divide. Older generations tend to remain more religious, while younger ones steadily drift away. This isn't just about rebellion, it's about cultural context. If you grew up with religion as the unquestioned norm, it's harder to let go. But if you grew up surrounded by diversity of belief, scientific education, and open conversation, religion feels optional at best. Every new generation raised in a less religious environment makes a return less likely. Some defenders of religion argue that once people face major life events, like marriage, parenthood, or mortality, they'll come back to faith. And yes, some do. But the data shows the opposite trend is more common. Even during moments of crisis, many people today turn to secular communities, therapy, or personal reflection rather than organized religion. Once the old habits are broken, they rarely regain their strength. At the same time, religion often survives by reinventing its image. Prosperity preachers promising wealth, spiritual influencers selling holy wellness, leaders rebranding dogma as personal growth. Yet beneath the surface, the same supernatural claims remain, and as people become more critical consumers of information, it's harder to disguise those claims behind modern packaging. We also need to look at how religion operates on a political level. In some countries, leaders deliberately lean on religion to maintain control, using divine authority as a shield against criticism, framing opposition as not just political, but blasphemous. Yet history shows that when power depends too heavily on religion, it becomes brittle. Once people stop believing, the entire political structure wobbles, and that's why some regimes fight so desperately to censor, punish, or even kill dissenters. They know that the decline of religion is also the decline of their power. But in freer societies, the opposite happens. Religion aligns itself with political causes, but the backlash is swift. For example, when churches in some countries tried to block equal marriage rights, their memberships dropped. Younger generations simply didn't want to be part of an institution that placed itself on the wrong side of history. By trying to preserve control, religion often speeds up its own decline. Another under-discussed factor is the rise of global awareness. In the past, people might live their entire lives only knowing their own faith. Today, a teenager can read sacred texts from 5 different religions in a single afternoon. And when those texts contradict each other, the illusion of absolute truth falls apart. Exposure to competing worldviews doesn't just challenge belief, it normalizes doubt, and doubt, once planted, is hard to uproot. Religion teaches certainty, but modern life teaches complexity. The more interconnected the world becomes, the less convincing simple answers sound. So what might a future without dominant religion actually look like? On one hand, it could mean less conflict driven by sectarian divides, fewer wars fought over invisible deities, fewer laws restricting people's freedoms based on scripture. On the other hand, it also means humanity must take full responsibility for its own morality. There's no divine referee to appeal to, no cosmic punishment to fear, only the consequences of our choices and the values we decide to uphold. Some see that as frightening, others see it as liberating. The end of religion doesn't mean the end of guidance. It means guidance must come from reason, empathy, and shared humanity rather than authority claimed from the sky. And perhaps that's the biggest sign that religion is fading. It no longer defines morality, it no longer owns community, it no longer holds a monopoly on meaning. All the things people once thought required gods are now being built by humans, without gods. So yes, it's entirely possible we are watching the end of religion as a central force in human life, not in flames, not in sudden collapse, but in a steady decline, a fading relevance, an unraveling authority, a story that fewer and fewer people choose to tell themselves. And in that space left behind, new stories are being written, stories of humanity defining its own purpose, its own morality, its own future, without needing the permission of the divine. If we take a step back and think historically, the signs of religion's decline today mirror patterns we've already seen before. When the Roman Empire shifted from worshipping a pantheon of gods to Christianity, it wasn't because people were suddenly enlightened overnight. It was gradual. The old rituals lost their grip. New movements gained momentum. The once dominant gods of Rome became background characters in myths. Today, Christianity itself occupies that role of dominance, but the same slow erosion is visible. The cycle is repeating. The same happened with Norse religion. For centuries, people in Scandinavia lived and died by the stories of Odin, Thor, and Freya. These gods weren't just entertainment. They were believed to be real, powerful, and essential. Yet over time, those beliefs shrank. Christianity replaced them. Then secularism replaced Christianity. What once felt permanent now lives mostly in comic books and video games. It's a reminder that every religion feels eternal when you're inside it, but none of them actually are. This historical perspective is important. It shows us that religion doesn't end in a single dramatic moment. It ends quietly, over generations, not with a declaration, but with disinterest. When people simply stop finding the stories convincing, stop showing up, stop caring, that's when religion ends. And that's exactly what we're seeing in many parts of the world today. Look at the numbers. In the UK, over half the population now identifies as having no religion. In Canada, the percentage of non-religious is rising every year. In the United States, long considered one of the most religious Western nations, the trend is unmistakable. The knowns are the fastest growing group. These shifts are not minor, they're generational transformations, but the numbers only tell part of the story. What matters even more is the cultural shift. A century ago, admitting disbelief could destroy your reputation. Today, in many circles, it's barely even noteworthy. The stigma is evaporating. And when the stigma is gone, the pressure to stay in religion for appearances collapses too. That said, we shouldn't underestimate the resilience of faith. In times of uncertainty, many people do turn back to it. And for some, religion provides comfort and structure that nothing else seems to offer. But the trend overall is not about isolated individuals, it's about the collective. And collectively, the pull of religion is weakening. One of the clearest indicators is the way religion struggles to capture the imagination of the young. Where once stories of miracles inspired awe, today's youth grow up watching science fiction and exploring virtual worlds. The wonders offered by religion feel small compared to the vastness of the universe revealed by modern science. Black holes, quantum mechanics, exoplanets. These are more mind-bending than any ancient miracle story. The human imagination is expanding, and religion is shrinking to fit into it. Another factor is accountability. In earlier times, religious leaders could operate with near total impunity. Today, scandals are exposed instantly, globally, and permanently. Cover-ups that once held for decades unravel within hours online. Once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to restore. And when institutions lose credibility, belief inevitably follows. So where does that leave us? Are we watching the end of religion? The evidence suggests we're watching the end of religion as a dominant, unquestioned authority, the end of its monopoly on truth, the end of its ability to dictate morality without challenge. But it's not the end of meaning or community or wonder. Those things are alive and well, just shifting into new forms. Philosophy, science, art, and human solidarity are stepping into the roles religion once held. Humanity is building its own frameworks, more flexible, more inclusive, and more honest. And maybe that's the real story here. Religion is not ending because people no longer care about truth or purpose. It's ending because people care about those things too much to settle for outdated answers. They want better explanations, better ethics, better ways of living, and they're realizing those things don't require gods. A few hundred years from now, future generations may look back at us the way we look back at the ancients. They may study Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, or Buddhism as fascinating myths of the past, stories that once commanded armies, built empires, and inspired art, before fading into history. And when that day comes, humanity will still be searching, still be wondering, still be creating meaning, but it will be doing so without the weight of divine authority pressing down, without fear of punishment or hope of eternal reward, simply as humans shaping their own destiny. So yes, we might very well be watching the end of religion, not with fireworks, but with quiet footsteps walking away, not with anger, but with indifference, not with collapse, but with evolution. And maybe, just maybe, that's not the end of anything worth keeping, but the beginning of something better. The end of religion, if that's what we're witnessing, isn't really about temples, churches, or mosques closing their doors. It's about something deeper. It's about a shift in how humanity sees itself. For thousands of years, we looked upward for answers. Now we're learning to look inward and outward, to each other and to the universe itself. That change is subtle but powerful. Instead of waiting for revelations, we're creating knowledge through science. Instead of relying on commandments, we're building ethics through dialogue and empathy. Instead of separating ourselves into rival groups of believers, we're slowly realizing that we share the same planet, the same struggles, the same future. And while religion may still cling on in some corners of the world, its authority is eroding, its hold on the human imagination is slipping, and its relevance in solving real-world problems is shrinking. Each generation raised with fewer ties to faith carries us further down that path. Some may mourn that loss, seeing it as the fading of tradition, but others see it as growth, the shedding of an old skin that no longer fits. Humanity doesn't stop asking big questions just because religion fades. If anything, the questions get sharper, the answers more honest, the journey more open-ended. Think about it. The meaning of life, the nature of the universe, the mystery of consciousness. These are questions that no holy book has truly answered, and yet they remain the most profound questions we face. The difference now is that we're approaching them without pretending we already know. We're willing to admit uncertainty, willing to live with mystery, willing to seek truth even if it's uncomfortable. That willingness is what sets this moment apart. It signals maturity, a collective step away from myths that once guided us but now hold us back. It shows we're ready to carry responsibility ourselves rather than outsourcing it to invisible powers. So are we watching the end of religion? In many ways, yes. The rituals may continue, the names may endure, but the unquestioned dominance is gone. What's rising in its place is not emptiness, but possibility, a new way of understanding life that doesn't depend on fear or authority, but on curiosity, compassion, and truth. If history teaches us anything, it's that no belief system lasts forever, but meaning does, wonder does, the search for truth does. Those will always remain, long after the last hymn is sung, long after the last prayer is whispered. And perhaps that's the real legacy of religion, not its doctrines, but the fact that it kept the questions alive until we were ready to seek the answers ourselves. As the old certainties fade, we're left with something far more valuable, the freedom to face reality as it is, to shape morality together, to find purpose in the fleeting, precious fact of being alive. And in that freedom, we might finally discover that the end of religion is not the end at all, but the beginning of a story we get to write ourselves.